What would you do if the man you loved gave up billions to marry you, only for his powerful family to show up years later, with one offer that could change everything again? I used to believe that marrying into wealth would solve all my problems, that if I just found the right man, rich, powerful, polished, everything would finally fall into place. But life, as it turns out, doesn't follow the stories we write in our heads. It was a Monday morning like any other in New York. I was running late for work, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, dodging pedestrians like my life depended on it. My boss had already warned me about being late again, and I was one subway delay away from unemployment. And that's when I crashed straight into someone. My coffee exploded like a firework between us. The lid popped off, splattering dark liquid across a crisp white shirt and navy blazer. My phone hit the ground with a loud crack, and I stumbled backward, completely mortified. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I blurted, heart pounding as I looked up. He had already caught me by the elbow, steadying me before I could fall. His hands were warm and firm, and for a moment I forgot about the mess. I looked up and time did something strange. He had these deep brown eyes, kind, steady, curious. His face was clean-shaven, sculpted but soft in the way that made you want to trust him instantly. He looked like he belonged in a GQ spread, or on a yacht in the south of France, and I had just baptized him in espresso. "I should be the one apologizing," he said gently. "Are you okay? Why is he apologizing? I just ruined his outfit." Before I could stammer something halfway coherent, he was already stooping down to grab my phone. "Cracked," he said with a small wince. "Let me at least buy you another coffee or a new phone." I laughed nervously. "You don't have to do that." "I want to." His voice was smooth, like a song you didn't know you loved until you heard it again. "Besides, I think fate just needed an excuse." I blinked. "Excuse? To introduce us?" I should have walked away. I had a meeting. My shirt was stained, my phone screen shattered, and this was clearly some charming man with way too much confidence. But something about him felt different. We ended up sitting in that coffee shop for 3 hours. I never made it to the meeting. My job could wait. His name was Graham Whitmore. He asked about my work in marketing, but not in that half-listening, nod-along way most men did. He asked follow-ups. He smiled when I lit up about a campaign I was proud of. He laughed at my dry humor. He made me feel seen. He told me he worked in finance consulting, he said. Nothing flashy, just helping people make better decisions. I didn't pry. When I finally stood up to leave, he walked me to my car like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can I take you to dinner?" he asked. "Not let's hang out, or we should grab drinks sometime." Dinner. I said yes before my brain could catch up. Our first real date was a picnic in Central Park. He brought homemade sandwiches packed in Tupperware with handwritten labels that made me laugh. "This one's turkey, but I panicked and put mustard on it. Sorry in advance." We sat under a giant oak tree, the kind with roots that twisted like old stories. He had strawberries and chocolate and a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. When a breeze made me shiver, he moved closer and wrapped his jacket around my shoulders. It was effortless, thoughtful, not performative. Like he didn't even think twice about it. And when he looked at me, really looked, I felt something I hadn't in a long time wanted. Safe, alive. Our second date was when I realized I had no idea who I was dealing with. I expected him to call an Uber, maybe a black car. But when this sleek black Bentley pulled up outside my apartment, I thought it was a celebrity's driver. Then Graham stepped out, wearing a casual button-down and that same quiet smile. I stood there, stunned. "This is yours?" He opened the door like it was no big deal. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted tonight to be special." He didn't brag, didn't explain. Just existed in this reality I wasn't prepared for. The late-night calls started after that. We talked until 2 or 3 in the morning about everything and nothing, Childhood fears, favorite songs, his dream of starting a foundation for underprivileged kids, my silly wish of opening a boutique agency. "You should do it," he said one night. "You're brilliant." No one had ever called me brilliant before. Not like that. Not like they meant it. Then came the flowers, white roses at my office, with a note, "Because you smiled at me yesterday." Sunflowers the next week. These reminded me of how bright you make everything. My co-workers thought he was a fairy tale. I just thought I was lucky. 2 months in, he surprised me with a weekend getaway to Napa Valley. We stayed in a cozy bed and breakfast surrounded by endless vineyards. We drank wine, laughed under the sun, and wandered through fields like kids in a movie. That night, under a million stars, he kissed me for the first time, right there between the grapevines. Soft, certain, real. And in that moment, I stopped thinking about jobs, status, fears, or where I came from. I only thought, maybe this is what love is supposed to feel like. Falling in love with Graham Whitmore was the easiest thing I'd ever done. Staying in love once, I saw where he came from, was the hardest. It was about 3 weeks after Napa when he first mentioned his parents. We were curled up on his leather couch, a half-finished bottle of wine on the coffee table, our legs tangled under a blanket. My engagement ring, still new and surreal, caught the warm light of the lamp as I absently played with his fingers. "My parents want to meet you," he said suddenly. I looked up, surprised but not unhappy. "Really?" He nodded, but something about his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Are they excited for the engagement?" I asked. He kissed my forehead. "They'll come around." "You're impossible not to love." It should have comforted me. It didn't. Because when someone says they'll come around, what they're really saying is they're not there yet. And when it comes to parents and marriage, not there yet can mean never. The days leading up to that dinner were filled with strange energy. Graham, usually calm and focused, started getting distracted. He took more phone calls than usual, stepping outside when he did. When he came back in, there'd be a tightness in his jaw, like he was chewing on something bitter he couldn't spit out. I asked once what was going on. "Family stuff," he said quickly. "Nothing to worry about." But I was worried. He wasn't the same. Not with me, but with the world around him. It was like he was bracing for a storm only he could see. I spent hours house-goozing what to wear. How do you dress for a dinner where you're meeting people who were born into wealth, who host galas for fun, and probably own horses with names like Marzipan and Colonel Wellington? I settled on a sleek navy dress that looked expensive, even though it was second-hand. I paired it with my nicest heels and a gold bracelet my grandmother gave me when I turned 18. "I just want them to see I belong," I whispered to myself in the mirror, "that I'm worthy." Graham picked me up in his Bentley, and the moment I got in, I could feel the tension radiating off him. "Just be yourself," he kept saying on the drive. "Of course," I said, smiling, but inside I was rehearsing every word I might say. Their house estate sat on top of a hill, behind iron gates that whispered power before you even reached the front door. Perfectly manicured hedges, a circular driveway with a fountain, the kind of place that didn't just scream money, it screamed old money. Graham's mother opened the door. She was beautiful in that cold, sculpted way. Diamond earrings, crisp cream blouse, eyes like icicles. "You must be Graham's friend," she said, her lips curling around the word like it was a lemon rind. "Not fiancé, not even girlfriend, friend." Graham's jaw tightened. "She's my fiancé," he said firmly, holding up my hand so she could see the ring. His mother smiled, tight and forced, and stepped aside. Of course. The house was a museum, marble floors, crystal chandeliers. Everything so pristine, I felt like one wrong step would shatter the illusion. Graham's father didn't get up when we entered the sitting room. He looked up from his newspaper, gave me one disinterested glance, and then returned to the business section. Dinner was awful. His mother asked what I did for work, and when I explained my role in marketing, she tilted her head and said, "Oh, how creative." Like I'd just announced I finger-painted for a living. When I mentioned I was from Brooklyn, his father raised an eyebrow and said something about urban areas and how he used to give back by volunteering in those neighborhoods. They asked about my family, my education, my background. Every question sounded like a test, and I could feel myself failing. Graham squeezed my hand under the table, his thumb gently rubbing circles across my skin. I kept my face calm, but my stomach twisted tighter with every microaggression, every fake smile, every moment I was made to feel like I didn't belong at their table. After dinner, Graham excused himself to take a call, and that's when the masks came off. His mother leaned across the table, her voice now low, clipped, clinical. "Listen, dear, Graham's going through a phase." My heart skipped. "A phase?" She sipped her wine. "He's always been drawn to exotic things." Exotic. The word landed like a slap. She went on, casually cruel. "But when it comes to marriage, when it comes to carrying on the family name, there simply isn't room for someone like you in this family." Someone like you. She didn't say black. She didn't have to. Her tone, her look, her everything screamed it loud enough. I sat there, staring at the white tablecloth, willing the tears not to come. I slipped outside to the garden. The cold air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. I needed to breathe. I needed to hold myself together long enough to walk out of that place with my head held high. 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps. Graham. The moment he saw my face, his expression changed. Concern melted into fury. "What happened?" he asked, sitting beside me. I tried to lie. Tried to protect him from the truth, but he saw right through me. "What did they say to you, Ava?" I told him. All of it, and I watched something break in him. He stood up so fast the bench shook. His hands trembled. "They said what?" he whispered, and I knew this was the moment everything would change. When Graham stood up that night in his parents' garden, something in him changed. The man I had fallen in love with, gentle, thoughtful, endlessly kind, was still there. But in that moment, I saw something deeper, something sharper. I saw the man he had become in spite of this house. He didn't speak right away. His fists clenched at his sides, chest rising and falling like he was trying to keep his rage from boiling over. I stood too, unsure whether to follow or stop him. But I didn't have a choice. He was already moving fast. I caught up just in time to see him throw open the French doors that led back into the formal sitting room. The fire in the hearth cast long shadows, and the clink of wine glasses stopped the moment we entered. Vanessa Blake and Charles Whitmore looked up from their seats with mild annoyance, like we were interrupting a symphony. "We need to talk," Graham said, his voice low and steady. His mother raised an eyebrow. "Now?" "Yes, now." His father barely looked up. "If this is about dinner..." Graham cut him off. "Did you or did you not tell my fiancée that there's no room for her in this family?" The room went silent. You could hear the fire crackling. You could hear me holding my breath. Vanessa shifted in her seat. "Darling, I think you've misunderstood." "Don't," Graham snapped. "Don't lie." "Not to me." His voice cracked, just slightly, but it carried more force than a scream. He turned to his father. "And you? You sat there and watched it happen. You let her be insulted in your home." Charles set his glass down a little too hard. "You're being dramatic." "No," Graham said. "I'm being honest." He walked to the center of the room and looked between them, eyes burning. "I'm done pretending that you're decent people behind closed doors. You humiliated the woman I love." "For what? Because she didn't come from your country club circle? Because she's not white enough for the Christmas card?" His mother stood then, smoothing her blouse like the conversation was beneath her. We're simply concerned with the future, Graham. With the legacy. Graham turned toward her, jaw tight. Legacy? What legacy? A name tied to a foundation that does everything for image and nothing for impact? A company that values perception over purpose? He shook his head slowly. You always said I should be proud of where I came from, but I've never felt more ashamed than I do right now. Then came the final blow. Charles stepped forward, eyes hard. You're our son, and you have responsibilities. If you choose this, he gestured vaguely toward me, like I was a bad investment, you're choosing to walk away from everything we've built. Everything. The company, the inheritance, the estate. It was a line drawn in marble. Vanessa added, You need to decide her, or your family. I wanted to scream, to beg him not to do this for me. To walk away, if it meant keeping his world intact. But before I could speak, Graham raised a hand, stopping me. He didn't look shaken anymore. He looked free. You want me to choose, he said quietly. Fine. He turned to me, and in that moment, I swear the entire room disappeared. His eyes met mine steady, warm, home, and he said, I choose her. Just like that. Not a dramatic speech, not a long-winded plea. Just the truth. Simple, absolute. I choose love over legacy. I choose honesty over hypocrisy. I choose our life, not the one you scripted for me when I was a boy too scared to ask questions. He reached for my hand, and I took it with trembling fingers. Charles's face went red. You're making a mistake. Graham didn't flinch. No. I'm finally getting it right. Vanessa's voice turned cold. You'll regret this. But I already knew he wouldn't, because the man standing beside me didn't just love me, he believed in us enough to burn down every golden bridge behind him. We walked out of that house with nothing but each other. No inheritance, no title, no safety net. But as the front doors closed behind us, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. And as we stood outside in the cold night air, beneath a sky that didn't care how much money anyone had, he turned to me and said something I'll never forget. They were right about one thing. I looked up. What? This changes everything. And it did. That night we didn't go back to my apartment. We didn't go to his condo overlooking Central Park. We checked into a cheap hotel just off the highway, the kind with humming vending machines and fluorescent lighting. It was quiet. Safe. Real. We lay in bed, fully dressed, holding hands and staring at the ceiling. I'm scared, I whispered. Me too, he said. And then he kissed my knuckles one by one. But I'm also more sure of this than anything in my life. Love isn't just champagne and sunsets. Sometimes, love is choosing the hard thing, the messy thing, the real thing. And that night, Graham Whitmore, the billionaire's son, the man with everything, chose me. Not because I fit into his world, but because he wanted to build a new one with me in it, together, from scratch. The next morning, we woke up to the sound of traffic and someone vacuuming the hallway. Not exactly the fairy tale ending, right? We were in a budget hotel, our bags still in the trunk of Graham's car, our future a complete blank slate. No company, no inheritance, no warm parental send-off. Just us, me, and the man who had walked away from everything for love. And now we had to figure out what came next. I guess we're technically homeless, I joked, half laughing as I sat up in bed, hair a mess, heart still pounding from everything that had happened. Graham gave me a sleepy smile. Not homeless, just unrooted. I liked that, because roots can grow again, especially if you plant them together. We found a one-bedroom apartment in Harlem the following week. It wasn't much. The bathroom tiles were cracked, the kitchen window didn't quite shut all the way, and the building had a very character-building elevator that groaned every time we used it. But the rent was affordable, and it was ours. For the first time, Graham had to set up utilities himself, buy used furniture, cook his own breakfast. It was humbling and kind of hilarious. I still remember the first time he tried to assemble an IKEA dresser. He stared at the instructions like they were ancient hieroglyphics. "You have 3 degrees and can't figure out a hex key?" I teased. "I hired people for this before," he muttered. We laughed until our sides hurt, because sometimes all you can do is laugh when your whole life's been flipped upside down. Graham didn't waste time. He poured himself into a new venture, something he'd talked about for years, but never had the courage to start. A consulting firm, but not just any firm. One focused entirely on helping minority-owned businesses get off the ground. Funding, strategy, access to resources that most entrepreneurs like me had to scrape and beg for. "I want to use what I know," he told me one night, tapping away at a business plan on his laptop, "to help people who were never invited to the table." I watched him work 18-hour days from our tiny kitchen table, emails flying, Zoom calls back-to-back, hair disheveled, coffee cups piling up like trophies. And it was the sexiest thing I had ever seen, not because he was building something, but because this time it was his. Built on his own terms, his own values, no gold-plated shortcuts. No safety net, just grit. Meanwhile, I went back to my marketing job and worked hard. Harder than ever. We split bills, budgeted every dollar. We didn't have fancy date nights anymore, just movie marathons on the couch and dollar pizza slices on Fridays. But somehow, it felt richer, more real. We were partners now, not just in love, but in life. One night, maybe 3 months in, I came home to find Graham passed out on the couch, spreadsheets open on his laptop, a pen still in his hand. I just stood there and stared at him for a while. This man, who once had everything handed to him, had chosen to rebuild his life from the ground up, with me, for me. And I realized something that made my chest ache in the best way. He wasn't doing this for me. He was doing it with me. Not everyone understood. Some of our old friends vanished. Graham's old colleagues, especially the ones still dancing around his parents' orbit, pretended they didn't know what happened. A few sent polite texts like, "Hope you're doing okay," but none offered help. He never asked for it. That's not who he was anymore. But we found our people in new places. My co-workers threw us a surprise engagement dinner in the back room of a dive bar. Graham's best friend from college, Logan Pierce, drove 4 hours just to help paint our apartment walls. My neighbor, Miss Thelma, a retired school teacher with a flowered robe and no filter, started bringing us leftovers every Sunday. "This boy of yours," she said once, handing me a steaming dish of baked macaroni, "he got good heart. Don't let nobody tell you you don't deserve this love." And I cried right there in the hallway, because sometimes the people who barely know you see you the clearest. We didn't have chandeliers anymore, no 5-star restaurants, no drivers, no designer suits, but we had something better. We had truth. We had loyalty. We had mornings with instant coffee and soft kisses, evenings with tired eyes and tangled legs. Midnight talks about fears and dreams and what color we wanted our future baby's room to be. And we had each other's backs always. One evening, I found a post-it on my mirror. Just 3 words, scribbled in Graham's messy handwriting. "Still choosing you, every single day." He didn't just make that choice once in his parents' mansion. He made it again when rent was due, when the bank account dipped, when I got sick and couldn't work for a week, when he landed his first real client and said, "We did this." Not I. We. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't Instagram perfect, but it was ours, and that made it worth everything we'd lost. I used to picture a grand wedding, a cathedral, chandeliers, rows of elegant strangers, me in a designer gown, walking down an aisle lined with ivory roses. That was the dream, right? But standing at the back of a tiny chapel, my sister fixing the veil I'd borrowed from our neighbor, Miss Thelma, I realized something. Dreams change when you finally understand what matters. And this was everything. It had been 6 months since we walked away from Graham's family estate, with nothing but our love and a plan. Since then, we'd built a life from scratch. There was no wedding budget or luxury planner, just us. Just intention. Graham wanted something real. I wanted something joyful. We both wanted something ours. So we rented a small white church in the Bronx with creaky pews and a crooked steeple. The pastor was Logan's cousin. The flowers came from the bodega down the street. And the music? A Bluetooth speaker and a playlist our friends helped put together the night before over pizza and cheap wine. It was perfect. Not because it was flawless, but because it was honest. I didn't have bridesmaids in matching gowns. But I had my sister, Sophie, zipping up the back of my dress and wiping a smudge of mascara from my cheek. "You're glowing," she whispered. "I'm sweating," I said, laughing through the nerves. But she was right. I was glowing, because I was about to marry a man who had lost everything, willingly just to build a life with me. The chapel filled quickly. There were no paparazzi, no headlines, just people who had seen us, known us, loved us through every up and down. My co-workers, Graham's college friends, Logan, of course, who stood at the front with him, straightening his tie like a proud best man. Even Miss Thelma was there, in a purple Sunday hat, waving a little fan like it was July, even though it was only April. And my grandmother. Lord, my grandmother, who once raised an eyebrow when I told her I was marrying that rich boy, had fallen so deeply for Graham that she now called him baby and insisted he sit beside her at Sunday dinner. That's the thing about real love. It wins people over. Not with speeches, but with small, consistent acts of kindness. I walked down the aisle to a Stevie Wonder song, As. And when I saw Graham standing there at the altar, eyes glassy, hand over his heart, I felt every fear I'd ever carried about not being enough melt away. Because that man wasn't marrying someone who fit into his world. He was marrying the woman he chose to build a world with. And I was marrying the man who made me feel like the most valuable thing he'd ever had. The ceremony was short, sweet, intimate. We wrote our own vows. Graham went first. He took a shaky breath and said, "I used to think legacy meant money, buildings, last names carved in stone." He paused. "But then I met you, Ava, and you taught me that real legacy is love. The kind that outlives us, the kind that doesn't need a mansion or a bank account, just two people willing to choose each other over and over again." He looked right at me. "And I will choose you every day, in struggle and in joy, in brokenness and in bloom, no matter what the world says." I barely made it through my vows without crying. I told him that he'd shown me what real courage looked like, not in fighting, but in walking away from a life that no longer aligned with his soul. That loving him didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt like coming home. When the pastor declared us husband and wife, the whole chapel erupted in cheers. We didn't walk back down the aisle to a string quartet. We danced out to earth, windfire. People clapped, laughed. Someone cried, someone tripped. It was messy and loud and unforgettable. It was ours. The reception was held in the basement of the church. Folding tables, twinkle lights, and homemade cupcakes. Graham stood up and gave a toast. He didn't mention money or legacy or any of the things his parents once obsessed over. He just said, "I never knew what peace felt like until I lost everything and found Ava." I will never forget that. Not because it was poetic, but because every person in that room believed it. His parents weren't there. They didn't call. They didn't send a card, and honestly, their absence was a gift. Because our wedding wasn't about convincing anyone we belonged. It was about declaring, loudly and joyfully, that we did. At one point during the reception, My grandmother pulled me aside. "That boy of yours," she said, sipping sweet tea, "he's got a good heart. You hold on to him." I smiled. "I plan to." Then she said something that stuck with me. "Money's loud, baby, but love, real love is quiet. Steady. Shows up even when it's tired. You got that now?" That's the kind that lasts. That night, back in our apartment, we changed out of our wedding clothes and sat on the floor eating leftover cupcakes, bare feet touching, no music, no cameras. And Graham looked at me with a grin so big it made my chest ache. "We did it," he said. "Yeah," I whispered. "We really did. Not just the wedding, but the life. We'd built it. Together. No handouts. No shortcuts. Just love, sweat, and a whole lot of stubborn faith. We didn't get married to prove anything. Not to his parents, not to society, not even to ourselves. We got married because somewhere along the road of losing everything, we found enough. Enough love, enough truth. Enough us. But something unexpected happened after we said "I do." That enough started to grow. And it wanted to become more. It started small. Graham's consulting firm, once just an idea scribbled in a notebook in our tiny kitchen, began getting attention. Not from venture capitalists or tech giants. From people like us. From women starting food trucks out of their backyards. From barbers who couldn't get approved for bank loans. From immigrants with degrees no one here respected, but with dreams bigger than city skylines. They came because they heard there was a man who actually listened, who cared, who didn't wear a suit that cost more than their annual rent and then tell them to scale smarter. They came because of Graham Whitmore, the man who gave up his last name before he gave up on his values. And when they came, he showed up. I watched him turn our living room into an office. Whiteboard on one wall, post-it notes everywhere, a beat-up second-hand printer that jammed every other day. And I saw something new in his eyes, not just passion, but purpose. He wasn't just building a business anymore, he was building a movement. One night, long after we should have gone to bed, I found him hunched over his laptop, editing a pitch deck for a single mum from the Bronx trying to open a daycare center. "You've been at this for 6 hours," I said softly. He looked up, eyes tired but alive. "She just needs a chance, Ava. That's all. A chance like I got." I sat beside him, resting my head on his shoulder. "You earned your second chance," I whispered. He kissed my forehead. "Then I want to help other people earn theirs too." That's when the idea hit us. Why not build something bigger together? I had marketing experience. He had finance and strategy. What if we didn't just help people start? What if we helped them grow? We called it the Roots Project, a small non-profit aimed at empowering overlooked entrepreneurs, especially women and people of color, with mentorship, branding support, business coaching, and microloans. The name came from a line we wrote together in the mission statement. You don't need a mansion to make an impact. You just need roots strong enough to grow through concrete. We hosted our first workshop in the basement of a community church with folding chairs and free coffee. 10 people showed up. Then 20. Then 50. Graham stood at the front in jeans and a hoodie, no longer trying to impress anyone, and spoke from the heart about how rejection had shaped him more than privilege ever did. And people listened. Because nothing hits harder than honesty wrapped in hope. We didn't get rich. But we got rich in meaning. There's a difference. When the first business owner we funded, an Afro-Caribbean woman named Camille, opened her cafe and texted us a picture of her cutting the ribbon in front of a cheering crowd. I cried so hard I spilled tea on the couch. When another client, a formerly incarcerated man named Gerald, sent Graham a handwritten note saying, "You're the first person who saw me as more than a mistake," we framed it. We hung it by the door. Because that was our legacy now. Not inheritance, not titles. Impact. His parents never called, but we heard through someone that they wished him well, whatever that means. At first the silence stung, but eventually it felt like peace. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, and sometimes the family you create, neighbors, friends, clients, strangers who cheer you on, is more sacred than the one tied to your bloodline. We worked hard. We argued sometimes. Money was tight more than once. But every time I looked at Graham across our tiny dining table turned boardroom, I didn't see the boy who once lived in a mansion. I saw a man who chose love over legacy, purpose over pride. Me over them. One evening I came home and found a note on the fridge. It read, "What if everything they took gave us this?" I stood there, fingers on the paper, and let those words settle in my bones. Because he was right. They took the trust fund. They took the invitations. They took the last name that opened doors. But in doing that, they gave us the freedom to build our own. Not just a life, a mission. I once thought love meant security, a white picket fence, a big house, approval. But Graham taught me something far more beautiful. Real love doesn't just hold your hand. It lifts others with it. Real love builds more than a home. It builds community. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way. I was folding laundry in the living room, the radio playing some 90s R&B, when I heard Graham's phone buzz on the kitchen counter. He was in the shower, so I picked it up to check. One notification, just a name. Vanessa Blake. My stomach turned before I even opened it. It had been over a year since our wedding. Over a year since we walked away from marble floors and cold smiles and legacy-shaped chains. We'd heard nothing from them. Not a call. Not a card. Not even a whispered regret passed through the grapevine. Until now. Graham came out a minute later, towel around his waist, hair dripping. "There's a message from your mom," I said softly. He froze. "What?" I handed him the phone. He sat on the couch, dripping water onto the cushion, staring at the screen for what felt like an eternity. Then he read it aloud. "Your father isn't well. We thought you should know. We'd like to talk. Please. Nothing more. No apology. No warmth. Just a summons wrapped in formality." Graham didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat there, fingers tightening around the phone, eyes unreadable. I didn't push. Eventually he looked at me and asked, "If it were your father, what would you do?" I was quiet for a moment. "Honestly," I said, "I'd want closure. Not for them, for me." He nodded slowly. Then he whispered, "I don't even know what I'd say to them anymore." We didn't talk about it again until 2 nights later. We were lying in bed, facing opposite directions, when he said softly, "I think I need to see them." I rolled over, meeting his eyes in the dark. "Then I'll go with you." He blinked. "You would?" I reached for his hand. "They don't get to have you without me." We drove upstate that weekend. Same estate, same iron gates. But everything felt different this time. We weren't arriving as supplicants. We weren't hoping for a seat at their table. We were the table now. Vanessa opened the door. Older, maybe. Still elegant in that way that said she measured her smiles. "Graham," she said, eyes flicking past him to me. "Mother," he replied. No hug? No warmth? She stepped aside and we walked in. The house looked the same. Marble, crystal. Cold air that smelled like polished wood and too much money. Only this time, I didn't feel small. Because this time, I wasn't here to impress anyone. I was here to stand beside the man who finally knew his worth. Charles Whitmore was in the study. He looked thinner. Weaker. Age had found him quickly, as if pride had kept it at bay for years and then suddenly gave out. He glanced up from his chair when we entered. "You came," he said simply. Graham nodded. "You asked." There was a long silence. Then Charles gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." We both sat. He looked at me for a moment. I expected the same appraisal I'd seen before. But this time, it wasn't there. Just exhaustion. Just something almost human. I was wrong, he said finally. About you. About all of it. I held my breath. Vanessa was standing behind him, arms crossed, eyes hard. Graham spoke first. What changed? Charles exhaled slowly. Watching your company thrive. Seeing the people you help. Seeing how much better you are without us. A pause. And knowing I'm running out of time. Vanessa shifted, as if she wanted to stop him, but he kept talking. I spent my whole life building an empire I thought mattered. And when I saw you walk away from it without blinking, I realized maybe I'd built a cage. Graham swallowed hard. You did. Charles nodded. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want to leave this world without saying something real. The silence was heavy. And then Graham did something I didn't expect. He leaned forward, looked his father in the eye and said, I don't hate you. Vanessa flinched. But I don't want your money. I don't want your empire. I do want peace. His father nodded. I think that's all I can give. We didn't stay long after that. Vanessa barely spoke to me. She did, however, say this at the door. You've made him harder to control. I smiled politely. Good. On the drive home, Graham was quiet. I gave him space. Finally, he said, that chapter is closed. Not erased, just closed. And I nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. Because healing doesn't always look like hugs or happy endings. Sometimes, healing is just walking away, knowing you didn't carry the bitterness with you. That night, back in our small apartment, we curled up on the couch, wrapped in the blanket Miss Thelma had crocheted for our wedding. Graham kissed my shoulder and whispered, Thank you. For what? I asked. For never making me choose again. He'd chosen me once. But this time, he chose peace. For himself, for us, for whatever future we were brave enough to build next. We thought the hardest part was behind us, that walking away from money, comfort and status meant we'd never have to face those temptations again. We were wrong. Because sometimes the past doesn't come back as a threat. Sometimes it comes dressed as a second chance. It started with a letter. A real one, stamped, embossed. No email, no call. The return address, Whitmore Associates, the family firm Graham had once been groomed to run. The same company he'd turned his back on without a second thought. Graham opened it at the kitchen table, still in his sweats, oatmeal half-eaten beside him. I was washing dishes when I heard him say, You're not going to believe this. I dried my hands and sat beside him as he read aloud. Dear Graham, we'd like to formally extend an offer for you to return to the board at Whitmore Associates in a leadership capacity of your choosing. We believe your recent work and public impact align with the values we hope to cultivate as we enter a new era. It went on to praise his work with the Roots Project, mention modernizing company culture, and included terms that made my head spin. Equity, full control of philanthropic initiatives, a blank check for impact programs. And then the line that gave me chills, we are prepared to let you lead, not follow. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally I said, Wow. Graham stared at the paper. Yeah. You okay? He nodded, slowly. I think so. I just never expected this. Neither did I. But deep down I knew this wasn't just about power. It was about identity. The boy who once belonged to that world was gone. And now the man who had rebuilt himself from nothing was being asked if he wanted to return, but this time as himself. That night we didn't talk about it. We made dinner, watched a documentary, cuddled on the couch. But I could see it in his eyes, a flicker of that old conflict, that tug of war between the legacy he was born into and the one he was building with me. The next morning, Graham asked if we could go for a walk. It was cold out, but we bundled up and wandered through Riverside Park, fingers interlocked, footsteps slow. "I'm not tempted by the money," he said eventually. "Or the power. I know. But the chance to change it from the inside." I nodded. "That's harder to ignore." He looked at me. "Do you think going back would mean betraying what we built?" I thought about that, then said, "I think it depends on who you're bringing back with you." "The old Graham? Or the one sitting right here?" He smiled. "Because if you walk into that boardroom as you," I added, "the man who stood up to his parents, the man who helps people without cameras watching, then no, I don't think it's betrayal." I paused. "But if you walk in trying to prove something, that's when you lose." We spent the rest of the week weighing it. We talked about how it could help the Roots Project, how many doors it might open for underserved entrepreneurs, how it could amplify everything we'd been working toward, and how dangerous it might be if he got pulled back into the very culture that once tried to silence him. But the thing that kept sticking in my heart was this. They weren't offering him redemption. They were offering him recognition. And maybe, just maybe, he'd already earned that. 2 weeks later, Graham walked into Whitmore Associates for the first time in nearly 2 years, not in a tailored suit, not with a briefcase, in jeans, with rolled-up sleeves and a head held high. They offered him a corner office. He asked for a seat at every table that mattered, including the one no one invited black founders or women entrepreneurs to. He accepted the role only under one condition: that the Roots Project would remain independent and be fully funded with no oversight. That his work wouldn't just continue, it would scale, and they agreed. Because you don't argue with someone who has proven they can win without you. That night, he walked back through our apartment door, hair tousled from the wind, a soft smile on his lips. I looked up from the couch. "Well?" They said yes. I stood and threw my arms around him, and he held me so tight I could barely breathe. "You're not going back," I whispered. "You're going forward." Graham didn't sell out. He reclaimed something. He didn't need their name anymore. But now, that name Whitmore was associated with the man who had once walked away and came back with purpose, not for glory but for good. People began to notice. The media wrote articles about the return of the Whitmore heir. They didn't know half the story, but the communities we served, they did. Because now, every time a young founder got a grant, every time a single mom got legal support to launch her business, every time a barbershop got its first round of funding, that legacy, the one that used to be steeped in exclusion, looked a little more like justice. "You're changing the meaning of your last name," I told him one night. He looked at me and smiled. "No," he said, "we are. I never pictured myself as a mother. Not because I didn't want to be, I just never thought life would give me the space to imagine it. For so long, my focus had been survival. Then came love. Then rebuilding. But motherhood? That felt like a different kind of dream. A softer one, a sacred one I'd quietly placed on a shelf marked maybe someday. Then one morning, I stood in our tiny bathroom, holding a stick with 2 pink lines that changed everything. I stared at it for a full 5 minutes, then 10. Then I sat on the edge of the tub, heart racing, hands shaking, breath caught in my throat. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. I smiled, not a big dramatic smile, just the kind that sneaks up when your soul says, "You're ready," even if you don't think you are. When Graham came home, I didn't say anything right away. I waited until after dinner, leftover pasta and garlic bread, eaten cross-legged on the floor because we still didn't own a proper dining table. He was telling me about a new micro-loan program he was structuring when I reached for his hand. "Graham," I said quietly. He looked at me, eyes softening the moment he heard my tone. "I have something to tell you." He straightened. "Okay?" I pulled the test from behind the cushion and placed it on the coffee table between us. It took him half a second. Then he froze. Then he blinked. Then tears. He covered his mouth and let out a laugh that was half joy, half disbelief. You're... I nodded, suddenly crying too. He pulled me into his arms and held me so tight I could feel his heartbeat racing against mine. I didn't think I could feel more in love with you, he whispered. But right now, I do. The next few weeks felt like magic and madness all at once. Morning sickness. Doctor's appointments, rerouting budgets, Googling everything we didn't know, which was a lot. But through it all, one truth anchored us. This wasn't something we planned for, but it was something we were meant for. Graham became a different kind of man in those months. More protective, more present. I'd catch him staring at my belly, completely transfixed, or leaving notes like, "You're going to be the best mum," on my pillow. He downloaded parenting podcasts, took walks just to talk to the baby, built a crib with shaking hands and unmatched screws. It was beautiful, and a little funny. Especially the day he tried to assemble a stroller and got stuck in it. "I'm fine," he said, legs tangled. "The baby's going to love this." "I think you love it," I laughed, helping him out. We decided not to tell his parents right away, not because of bitterness, but because it was ours. Something pure, untouched, something that didn't need anyone else's opinion to validate it. But we did tell Miss Thelma first. She squealed, then cried. Then brought over a stack of baby blankets she'd crocheted years ago, just in case God had other plans. "Family's what you choose to grow," she told us. "And y'all been growing for a while now." Our chosen family showed up in beautiful ways. Logan threw us a backyard baby shower with dollar store decorations and cupcakes that spelled Baby W, the W slightly smudged, but perfect nonetheless. Sophie, my sister, flew in from LA with a suitcase full of hand-me-down onesies and an overflowing heart. Our Roots project team held a surprise Zoom call where they each held up signs that said, "Future CEO loading." It was more love than I ever thought a child could be born into. One quiet night near the end of my second trimester, I sat on our couch, rubbing my stomach, listening to the wind outside. Graham was reading aloud from a children's book, trying out voices that made me laugh until I cried. Then he paused. "Do you think I'll be a good father?" I turned to him, stunned he'd even ask. "You already are," I whispered. He looked down. "It's just, you know how I grew up, cold halls. Expectations, not a lot of warmth." I took his hand. "Then that means you know what not to pass on." And that was the truth. Because legacy isn't just wealth or reputation, it's what you leave in someone's heart. And Graham was already planting seeds of compassion, presence, and love, not just in me, but in the child who would soon call him Dad. The night before our baby was born, Graham couldn't sleep. He paced the living room, talking to my belly like it could answer. "You're going to be okay," he said gently. "We're going to give you everything we never had. Not mansions or last names carved in stone, but warmth, safety. The kind of love that holds your hand on the hard days." I watched him from the doorway, full of life, love, and awe. And I whispered to myself, "You're already enough, just like this." The day our daughter was born, everything else in the world fell away. Not the contractions, of course, those were very real. Not the panic when my water broke at 2:37 a.m., and definitely not Graham trying to pack a hospital bag we'd already packed 3 times. But the rest of the world, the noise, the judgment, the fear. It disappeared, because when she let out that first sharp, beautiful cry, time stopped. And all I could do was cry with her. They placed her on my chest, all tiny fists and wrinkled skin and warm, miraculous weight. I looked over at Graham, this man who once lived in boardrooms and bespoke suits, who once belonged to a world that rejected me, now sobbing quietly, clutching our daughter's hand like she was the most sacred thing he'd ever touched. He whispered her name like a prayer. Liana Grace Whitmore. Liana, meaning to climb like a vine. Grace for what carried us through. Whitmore, not for legacy, but for renewal. Back home, our apartment transformed. Diapers replaced spreadsheets. Lullabies drowned out meetings. Our once quiet nights became a rotation of feedings and late-night rocking, punctuated by moments of wonder. Graham would hold her close, walk the halls barefoot at 3 a.m., humming soft Stevie Wonder and whispering, "I walked away from the world to find you." And I'd do it again. We didn't announce her birth online. We didn't call reporters or post photos. We just lived it. Held her, watched her sleep, introduced her slowly to the people who had become our real family. Miss Thelma, who brought over a silver rattle from her own childhood and declared, "This child is surrounded by ancestors who never got the chance to dream this far." Sophie, who cradled her niece like she'd known her in a past life. Logan, who swore he'd teach her to drive, and then immediately took that back once she projectile spit up on his shirt. Graham's parents sent a gift. A box of heirloom silver spoons. No note. We donated them to a shelter and never looked back. One afternoon, months later, I was holding Liana by the window, rocking her gently, when Graham came up behind me, wrapping his arms around us both. He rested his chin on my shoulder. "She's going to ask one day," he said. "Ask what? Why her last name is Whitmore, what it means, why we kept it after everything." I thought for a moment. "Then we'll tell her," I said, "that we didn't keep the name for what it meant. We kept it for what we turned it into." He kissed the side of my face. "From power," I whispered, "to purpose." As Liana grew, so did the Roots Project. We expanded to other cities, hired full-time staff, launched scholarships, fellowships, even a storytelling initiative to help overlooked founders share their journeys. And through it all, Graham never forgot who he was, or where we started, or what really mattered. He still made dinner every Tuesday, still walked Liana to daycare when he could, still wrote me post-it notes that said, "Still choosing you," every single day. Our home grew too. We eventually left that little apartment, but not for a mansion. We found a modest house in a quiet neighborhood with a creaky porch swing and enough room for a garden. Liana learned to walk on those wood floors, took her first steps right into her father's arms. He cried. Again. Sometimes, when the sun hits just right, and we're sitting on the porch watching our daughter chase bubbles in the yard, I think about that moment, the one in her grandparents' estate, the one where Graham had to choose them or me. And I realize now he wasn't just choosing me. He was choosing this life, this version of himself, this messy, beautiful, hard-earned family. People always say love is a feeling, but I don't believe that anymore. Love is a choice, made again and again. When it's easier to stay silent, love speaks. When it's safer to walk away, love stands. When the world offers you comfort at the cost of your soul, love says, "No, thank you. We'll build our own table." Liana will grow up knowing that her parents didn't have it all, but they fought for all the right things. And that's the story we'll tell her. Not about boardrooms and betrayal, but about a man who loved a woman so much he rewrote his destiny. And about a woman who loved herself enough to stop trying to fit in and started building something that fit her. We didn't follow a blueprint. We followed each other. And that made all the difference. Sometimes, the life you build is better than the one you were given. There comes a point in life when we stop asking, "Do I belong here?" and start building places where we do. This story reminds us that love, when it is real, doesn't demand we shrink ourselves to fit someone else's world. Instead, it invites us to co-create something new, something rooted in respect, not reputation. Graham didn't just walk away from wealth. He walked toward purpose. Ava didn't fight to be accepted. She chose to be seen. Together they built a life based not on legacy, but on choice, the kind of love that holds up even when comfort falls away. For many of us, especially in later chapters of life, we realize family isn't always who shares your name. It's who shows up, who lifts you, who chooses you again and again. And maybe the greatest legacy we can leave isn't property or prestige, it's presence, it's kindness, it's courage to say, "This is who I am. This is what we stand for." Because the life we choose with love, truth, and open hands is often better than the one we were told to accept.